I think one of the things I appreciated was you talked about this idea of being strong versus skinny.
Yeah.
So maybe we can go there. Let's talk a little bit about maybe that shift in paradigm in terms of how we can move from trying to always be skinny to moving to gamify strength, which is what really works for type A personalities like myself or recovering
Right.
type A. Because it's like, how much can I lift? I want to be able to be strong. I want to feel strong in my body, proud of what my body is capable of. Certainly understanding it's a long game, right? Like becoming strong does take time, putting on muscle does take time. It's a lifelong endeavor really, and a beautiful one to chase. So let's talk a little bit about how you approach, let's say, being strong in your body. And I know you talk about cyclical training, which is something I like to talk about as well, but I would love to hear your framework around it.
Yeah. I started a few years ago weighing 89 pounds. I'm petite, but still 89 pounds is ridiculous because there was this fashion, the skinnier, the better. But I couldn't lift my backpack, when I was traveling. I couldn't do so many things. And I just felt like very fragile in a way, navigating through the world, but not in an energetical sense. Like I wouldn't be able to hit someone, but from the place of like, just not feeling good in my body, in my own environment. I felt like, you know, I was worried to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Spoiler alert, it's not that
So
easy.
funny. Yeah,
But
I wish. I wish it was that easy.
but the funny thing is,
Yeah.
I lived in Venice, and so I started going to the gym, and Arnold was there every morning. So we were gym
Oh,
buddies. We
wow.
said good morning to each other. I was like, oh,
Oh, nice.
that is funny. And I saw how much he lifts. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm good. Definitely a
Yeah.
long way for me to go. That whole idea of like lifting heavy and just being scared because I guess I didn't have an example of feminine women that are toned. I wanted to be toned. I didn't want to be bulky. And then like, I can see that you lived it, but you're toned and beautiful, right? So it's really cool to, if you guys are listening to this, you maybe can't see, but then you have to go on Instagram or YouTube to see your arms and just like, wow, this looks really, really nice. And then I started learning about like skeletal muscles and I did a little scan. Turned out I have no skeletal muscles because I'm, not moving properly. So it's not even about your biceps or triceps, but just like overall skeletal muscles. I'm like, wow, like at 35, I started noticing that my back hurts. And I go to a physiotherapist and he's like, oh yeah, like you need better posture. And the better posture comes from like stronger muscle as well and how you like carry yourself. And so that kind of opened my eyes of like, oh wow, like it's not only an anti-aging. They realize that the tighter your posture changes, then it can cause wrinkles. And I always like to mention that because a lot of women were like, I don't care about posture. And I'm like, no, 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 you do. Because, we wear high heels, we have a lot of stress. And they say like the back of your neck and how it can actually, I mean, it's different theories. But the more I started caring about my posture, the more I realized that my lines are gone on my forehead. Because it's really
Hmm.
interesting how that stress
Wait,
and
because the aponeurosis comes
yeah,
around the head and then attaches to the base of the
yeah. So
skull.
it's like it's
Yeah.
such a power move for you to have stronger muscles, have a better posture, and then you don't have to you don't have all these aches and pains. So at the same time, it's just really interesting that it's like it's a beauty hack, that no one told you about before, before any facial or Botox or anything. Which is like I'm not against those, but just like really interesting how it's all connected and kind of like having an instruction manual of how to use your body, which is so sad that we need to have it right now. So, long story short, back to your question, I wanted to figure out a way of, how to lift weights. I did it every day. And then I realized sometimes some workouts I'm not performing as well. So I felt bad and broken and kind of felt like, how come Arnold can come every day? And I sometimes feel like I don't. And started reading it up and I just was like, wow, there's some like, bold theories that if you go too much into head or you lift too heavy before your workout, you can actually put on weight. And that had my attention. I was like, oh, interesting. And then like actually everything in nature is almost cyclical, right? Because we're lunar, nothing, there's no flowers, there's, no trees, like everything has some sort of cycle. And yet we're expecting ourselves to be always producing, always lifting as much at the gym and constantly progressing. And that kind of like got me curious and I started lifting according to my cycle. And I now love giving myself permission to take a break.
That's wonderful. And so, what does that look like for you now in terms of practical application? So, if you're
Hmm.
lifting according to your, so initially, I would assume, like myself, I was like, oh, I want to be. So, I always mention Dom D'Agostino, who's sort of like the king of keto, and he's now become a friend. But before I knew him and his wife, I remember him fasting. I think he had done a fast for maybe it was 7 days, something like that, and then went and deadlifted like 700 pounds. There's just some like ridiculous number.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I can do that. I want to try and do that as well. Of
Oh
course,
my
it
God, we're
didn't.
so similar.
Yeah. It was like, did not end up that, it did not work out that way. It was horrendous. My period, my cycle was messed up for a couple of months afterwards. So tell me, I mean, that's how I've sort of changed my view on fasting for women, which I know we're going to get to. But I'm curious in terms of what your framework is for cycling for women. So do you divide it into weeks? Is it follicular luteal? Is it like you do this on ovulation? Tell me how you're thinking about
So I
training
give
around your
myself
cycle.
a couple days of grace from the first day of my period, and that's basically where I feel usually my period like by day 3, even though I still have bleed, I feel absolutely great and strong. So I allow myself to kind of just like release, and I still move my body, but it's just not to the extreme. Then I would lift my weights, focusing on my ovulation. And it's funny, I kind of feel where my ovulation is around day 13, 14, and that's where I lift the heaviest. Then I kind of like slowly wean back. And then from day 21, it's just like 7 days where I just like maintenance, right? So these are some lighter Pilates or just like some lighter weights and just like doing more of a functional training, something that just is strengthens my knees and bones, but there's no like heavy weights and there's no a ton of I guess hit training. So I do upper body, lower body when I do workout, and then on the third day I do endurance. So
Right. Yeah, that's very similar. I typically I sort of always lead with, and I talked about this in my book. I said, always auto regulate. If you're feeling amazing on your period and you feel like lifting weights, like have at it. But for many women, to your point, the first couple of days there's cramping, you just feel sort of under the weather. You don't feel like squatting and putting a heavy barbell on your back. So I do like that cadence that you outlined where you sort of are lifting and then you reach sort of a crescendo around ovulation. So the heaviest weights maybe that you will lift in that cycle. And then sort of it comes back down on the other side. I actually have outlined almost the identical framework in terms of, and I always look at week 4 almost like a deload week, right? So if you
mhm,
still feel like you want to be lifting weights, you can, but to your point, it's going to be lighter weights and it's going to be higher repetition. So the
mhm.
intensity is still there. You still have the intensity and you're moving towards failure. You're not necessarily reaching failure, but it's a lighter weight.
Yeah.
And
Or
it
I
sort
do
of allows,
lunges or anything that can like strengthen those. Cause, a lot of times when you're on machines or if you lift heavy weights, it's very straight. So I'm trying to do anything that's at an angle to strengthen all of
right.
these like supporting muscle. But I love that you say that because I get actually in trouble with a lot of doctors because they're like, no, like you should like start lifting from day one. I'm like, have you ever like been in a woman's body? Like it's not easy on day one for a lot of women to like, okay, I'm going to start lifting heavy. So I
Yeah.
personally find that it's like, I'm, I used to have much heavier periods. I'm 36 now, so they're not as heavy as they used to be. And so by day 3, I feel absolutely great. But the first 2 days, I just feel like, no.
It's so, you know what women love more than anything, Aggie? Women love when men explain to them about their periods.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one thing that we love. We're like, please, doctor, please tell me about how I feel during my period. Tell me how I should be starting at day 1. Like, just explain me my life to me.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm saying that with, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see the sarcasm in my face, but hopefully you can pick it up in my voice as well. I have heard from, and I've reviewed some of the studies. There's meta-analyses that have been done that cannot pick up signaling, a strong enough signal, statistically significant signal around changing the way that you cycle. And my response to that is, okay, get it. And that doesn't fit with the narrative of the tens of thousands of women that I've spoken to. So it
That's what
may be
drives
the
me
case.
crazy. I'm like, have you actually spoken with women? Have you actually been hanging out with women and talking about it? Because like as you're saying, right? Like it's just this disconnect of when I see recently I saw exactly a guy who was like, here's what happened in your body when you're like on your cycle. And I was like, honestly, no. No.
It's like,
I'm
thanks
not.
for telling me that. Mansplained it to me a little bit more. I didn't catch it the first time. Yeah. 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 I always, and not to say that we're disregarding literature, like we're not disregarding studies. However, because the signal was not strong enough to be statistically significant, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't. And this is one of the things that I would like to always sort of double underline and highlight is you should always be listening to women. Anytime that I've seen any of these, and they're always bros, by the way. It's like it's for whatever reason, it's always like the bros in the fitness industry that are saying, "Oh, this is a non-issue." If you ever look at the comments whenever they have a post like this, thousands of women are like, "That's not my experience at all. I feel terrible the first couple of days of my period, or I feel like I have so much energy around ovulation, or I feel generally like I'm holding a lot of water retention, and my mood and my affect are affected in my luteal phase." And one of the guiding principles that I will always have in terms of trying to do my part in advancing women's medicine is like never disregard a woman's story. If you have tens of thousands of women that are saying that their cycle does affect mood, affect, energy, motivation, and then there's also a lot of literature to demonstrate that there's like the surge in estrogen changes our ligament laxity and all of that. Please don't say that
Yeah.
it's a non-issue and from day one you should be training hard. Like, please stop.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I
PSA.
think that's
Yeah.
really what I guess I'm a very unlikely biohacker because I wasn't ever, I'm not a doctor. Like I didn't feel like I have the right to ever speak about any of this. But at the same time, as I got into the biohacking space, just as a fan of this whole idea of human optimization, I realized I'm like, well, my role is being the bridge. I'm the bridge of getting the mainstream following that have never heard the word, never heard what it's like to be according to a cycle. And I'm like, hey, I'm starting a podcast and I'm bringing all of these smart people so you can be exposed to them. And I just get them curious and show them, hey, this is what's possible. But by the way, these are the experts, because at the end of the day, we need more women, we need more female voices, but also, I say it in the book that women are OG biohackers. We've been biohacking since 13 when you get your period. I'm like, why is it this color? Why am I feeling this way? Why is my stomach hurting? Like you constantly get biofeedback every month, almost like every day. And that makes us just such better biohackers because again, it comes from the feeling, which is feminine, not from the head, which is masculine. So when you look at the studies and you're like, oh, I should be feeling this way. And then we come from the head. Meanwhile, everything is, all over the place. Well, that's where the issues start. And I think that's like why listening to men and running studies on college boys that are 21 years old has brought us to the point of women really struggling with their periods and feeling, at endocrine disruptors and whatnot. So,
right. Well said.